Hello, my name is Renee. I am a student of English. I want to tell you about my life in New York. I want to tell you about my journey, how I learned to speak English naturally. When I first came here, I was shy. I knew some words, but I did not know how to speak like other people. But I found a way to learn. Let me tell you my story. When I first arrived in New York, I felt like I had stepped into a different world. The city was big, loud, and full of people who always seemed to be in a hurry. I had seen New York in movies before, but standing in the middle of Times Square with bright lights flashing around me and hundreds of voices speaking all at once was overwhelming. I clutched my suitcase tightly, feeling small among the towering buildings. I had dreamed about coming here for so long, but now that I was here, I felt lost. I had studied English in my home country, but it was not the same. In school, I had learned grammar rules and vocabulary lists. I could write essays and pass tests, but speaking was different. When I heard people talking around me, I struggled to catch their words. They spoke fast, with different accents, and they used phrases I had never seen in my textbooks. Even when I recognized words, I could not always understand what they meant together. It was like everyone spoke a secret language that I was not a part of. I moved into a small apartment that I shared with another student. Her name was Mia, and she was from Brazil. She spoke some English, but not fluently. We both had the same problem. We were in New York surrounded by English, but we did not know how to speak naturally. We helped each other when we could, but most of the time we just stayed quiet, afraid of making mistakes. One of my first challenges was going to the grocery store. I needed food, but I was nervous about talking to people. I walked into a small store near my apartment and picked up a few things: bread, eggs, milk. When I got to the cashier, she said something, but I did not understand. I stared at her, feeling my face turn red. She repeated herself, slower this time. "Do you need a bag?" I finally understood, but I was too nervous to answer. I just nodded. She smiled and handed me the bag, but I felt embarrassed. Why was it so hard to say one simple word? The next day, I decided to explore the city. I took the subway, but it was confusing. The announcements were in English, but they spoke too fast for me to understand. I watched other people trying to figure out what to do. I got on the train and hoped I was going in the right direction. At one stop, a man asked me, "Excuse me, do you know if this train goes to Brooklyn?" I panicked. I understood his words, but I did not know how to respond. I had to find a way to use English in real life. I had to listen more, speak more, and stop being afraid of making mistakes. The next morning, I decided to challenge myself. I would go to a coffee shop and order something in English. It seemed like a small thing, but to me, it was a big step. I walked into a small cafe near my apartment. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air. The barista smiled at me and said, "Good morning, what can I get for you?" My heart started pounding. I had practiced this moment in my head. I took a deep breath and said, "Can I have a tea, please?" The barista nodded. "Sure. What kind of tea?" I had not prepared for this question. My mind went blank. I saw the menu, but the words did not make sense to me. Instead of speaking, I just pointed at a name on the list. The barista looked and said, "Oh, green tea." Great choice. I nodded quickly. When I paid and took my tea, I felt both relief and disappointment. I had spoken, but I had not really had a conversation. As I walked out of the cafe, I thought about what had happened. I had taken a step forward, but I was still afraid to speak. I realized that my problem was not just the words. I was afraid of not being perfect. I did not want to make mistakes, but if I stayed silent, I would never improve. I needed a new plan. I needed to learn how people really spoke in everyday life. I needed to listen to real conversations and understand how people talk naturally. And that is exactly what I decided to do next. After my small victory at the cafe, I knew I had to do more. Ordering tea was a start, but I still did not feel comfortable speaking. I had learned something important. I was not just struggling with English, I was struggling with confidence. I was afraid of making mistakes. I wanted to speak naturally, but I was too nervous. I needed a new way to learn. That night, I sat in my apartment, thinking. I remembered something my English teacher back home once said. If you want to speak a language, you must listen to it first. That made sense. When babies learn to speak, they do not start with grammar rules. They listen to their parents. They hear words again and again until they understand them. Then one day they start speaking. The first chance came at a grocery store. I was waiting in line when the cashier greeted me. "Hey, how's it going?" I had heard this before. It meant, "How are you?" Normally, I would say, "I am fine, thank you," because that's what I learned in school. But no one here talked like that. I wanted to sound natural, so I smiled and said, "I'm good. How about you?" The cashier nodded and said, "Good. Thanks." Then she scanned my items. I felt proud. It was a small conversation, but I had spoken naturally. It felt different from before. I was not just using English, I was communicating. After that, I started speaking more. I still felt nervous, but I pushed myself. Whenever I went to a store or a cafe, I tried to say something extra. One day, I went to buy a sandwich. I had already practiced what to say. "Can I have a turkey sandwich, please?" I was ready, but then something unexpected happened. The cashier asked, "White or wheat?" I froze. I did not understand white or wheat. What did that mean? The cashier saw my confusion. She pointed to the bread and said, "Do you want white bread or wheat bread?" Oh, she was asking about the type of bread. I smiled and said, "Wheat, please." That moment taught me something important. I did not understand everything, but that was okay. If I did not know something, people would explain. I did not need to be perfect. After that, I became more confident. I started asking small questions to people. At a clothing store, I asked, "Do you have this in a smaller size?" At a cafe, I asked, "What's the most popular drink here?" At first, my sentences were not perfect. Sometimes I forgot words, but the more I spoke, the easier it became. One of my favorite moments happened in a bookstore. I was looking at a book when a woman next to me said, "That's a great book, you should read it." I smiled and said, "Oh, really? What's it about?" She explained, and I listened carefully. When she finished, I said, "Thanks, I'll check it out." She smiled and said, "No problem. Have a great day." After she left, I realized something. I had just had a real conversation with a stranger. No script, no practice, just normal, natural English. I felt amazing. I was finally using the language, not just studying it. Every day I learned more. I listened to people, used new words, and asked questions. Slowly, English started to feel less like a school subject and more like a part of my life. I understood something important. The best way to learn English is not just from books, but from real conversations. One evening, I sat in my apartment with my roommate, Mia. She asked, "How was your day?" Without thinking, I answered, "It was great. I had a fun conversation at the bookstore." Mia's eyes widened. "Renee, you sound so natural." I laughed. "Really?" "Yes, you didn't even think before you spoke. You're improving." She was right. I was not just memorizing words, I was living in English. And that was when I knew I was on the right path. After realizing that real conversations were the best way to learn English, I felt excited. I no longer saw English as something scary. Instead, I saw it as a tool, a way to connect with people. But there was still one problem. I was learning new words and speaking more, but I was mostly talking to strangers in small situations, like at stores and cafes. These conversations were short. I wanted to speak more, to have real, deep conversations. I wanted to make friends, but that thought scared me. Speaking for a few seconds at a coffee shop was one thing. Talking to someone for a long time was different. What if I made too many mistakes? What if people thought I was boring? What if I could not understand them? The fear returned. One evening, I was sitting in my apartment thinking about all this. My roommate, Mia, was scrolling through her phone. She looked up and said, "Hey, Renee, there's an international student event at the library tomorrow. Want to go?" At first, I wanted to say no. Meeting new people meant speaking more English. Speaking more English meant making more mistakes. But then I remembered something. I had promised myself that I would stop being afraid. I had come to New York to learn. This was my chance. So I took a deep breath and said, "Yes, let's go." The next evening, Mia and I arrived at the library. The event was for students from different countries who were learning English. The room was full of people. Some were talking loudly, laughing and making jokes. Others, like me, stood near the walls looking nervous. A woman with a warm smile walked up to us. "Hey, welcome. I'm Sarah. What are your names?" Mia answered quickly, but I hesitated. Why was it so hard to say my own name? Finally, I said, "I'm Renee." Sarah smiled. "Nice to meet you, Renee. Where are you from?" I felt my heart race. I had answered this question before, but my mind suddenly went blank. I took a deep breath and said, "I'm from Italy." The words came out slowly, but they came out. Sarah nodded. "That's awesome. Italy is beautiful." I smiled, feeling a little more comfortable. Then she said, "Come on, let me introduce you to some people." She took us to a table where 3 students were talking. "Guys, this is Renee and Mia," she said. One of them, a tall guy with glasses, smiled at me. "Hey, Renee, I'm Jake. First time at one of these events?" I nodded. "Yes, first time." Jake grinned. "Cool. Don't worry." We all felt nervous at first. I relaxed a little. Maybe I wasn't the only one who was afraid. As the night went on, I listened more than I spoke. I noticed how people talked. They did not always use perfect grammar. They made mistakes, laughed, and kept going. I realized something important. People did not care if my English was perfect. They just wanted to talk. At one point, Jake asked, "So, Renee, what do you like to do for fun?" I hesitated. I knew the words, but my brain felt slow. Should I say, "I like reading books," or "I like to read books"? Which was correct? Then I remembered something. It did not matter. So I just said, "I like reading books." Jake nodded. "Nice. What kind of books?" I smiled, excited to talk about something I loved. "I like mystery books." We continued talking. I made some mistakes, but nobody laughed. Nobody corrected me in a rude way. They just kept the conversation going. That night, something changed in me. I realized that I did not need to be perfect. I just needed to try. After that event, I started meeting more people. I went to study groups and language exchange meetings. At first, I was shy, but I kept reminding myself, if I want to speak naturally, I have to practice. One day after class, I was sitting alone in the cafeteria when I heard a familiar voice. "Hey, Renee, can I sit here?" I looked up. It was Jake. I smiled. "Yes, sure." As he sat down, he said, "So, how's your English journey going?" I laughed. "Better. I try to speak more." Jake nodded. "That's the best way to learn. You know, when I was learning Spanish, I was super nervous at first." I raised my eyebrows. "You learned Spanish?" "Yeah, I studied abroad in Spain. At first, I was scared to speak, but then I made some Spanish friends and they helped me. When you have friends to practice with, it gets easier." That gave me an idea. I needed friends who would help me practice English. So I started spending more time with Jake and the other students. They encouraged me to speak. They taught me new words and corrected me in a kind way when I made mistakes. They didn't laugh. They just explained. One day, Jake asked, "Do you want to come to a game night this weekend?" We play board games and just hang out. For a second, I wanted to say no. A whole night of speaking English? What if I embarrassed myself? But then I reminded myself I was learning to speak without fear. So I smiled and said, yes, I'd love to. Game night was one of the best nights of my life. We played a game called Taboo, where you had to describe a word without saying it. At first I was nervous, but then something amazing happened. I stopped thinking so much about grammar, I just spoke. At one point I had to describe the word ocean. I said, "It is big blue water." Fish live here." Everyone laughed in a friendly way. "The ocean!" someone shouted. I had done it. I had spoken English, and people understood me. That night, I realized that I was no longer the same girl who was afraid to order tea at a cafe. I was speaking without fear. A few weeks later, I was walking to class when someone tapped my shoulder. I turned around and saw a girl looking nervous. "Hi, do you know where the library is?" she asked slowly, as if she was still learning English. I smiled. I knew exactly how she felt. I answered naturally, "Yes, it's just down that street. Turn right at the corner and you'll see it." The girl smiled. "Thank you." As she walked away, I felt something powerful inside me. I had just helped someone in English. A few months ago, I was the one who was afraid to ask for directions. Now, I was the one giving directions. I realized that I had not just learned English, I had become confident. And that was when I knew I had finally started speaking naturally. The moment I gave directions to that girl, something clicked in my mind. I had spoken without thinking. I didn't pause to translate words in my head. I didn't feel nervous. I just spoke. It was a small thing, but it felt huge. For the first time, I wondered, was I finally thinking in English? After that day, I started noticing little changes in my daily life, small things that I had never thought about before. One morning, I woke up to the sound of my alarm. As I reached for my phone, my first thought was, I need 5 more minutes. But the strange part, I had thought it in English. I sat up in bed, surprised. Usually, my first thoughts were in Italian. Then I would translate them into English when I spoke. But this time, English had come first. That morning, as I made my coffee, I tested myself. Could I go through the whole morning without translating? Instead of thinking in Italian and then changing it into English, I just thought, today I have class at 10. After that, I'll meet Mia for lunch. It felt natural. Not perfect, but natural. I realized something. I wasn't just learning English anymore. I was living in English. The changes didn't stop there. Every day, I noticed more and more moments where English felt like my first response. One day, I was walking through a bookstore when I saw a mystery novel on display. I picked it up, read the summary, and thought, this looks interesting. I froze for a second. That thought had come in English, without effort, without translation. Another time, I was at a coffee shop, waiting for my order. A woman next to me dropped her phone, and without thinking, I said, "Oh, here you go." As I picked it up for her, she smiled. "Thanks." I smiled back. "No problem." It was such a normal, everyday moment, but inside, I was celebrating. I had spoken in English without hesitation, without fear. At home, I started watching TV shows without subtitles. At first, I missed some words, but I didn't pause or look them up. Instead, I just kept watching, letting my brain fill in the gaps. One evening, Mia and I were watching a comedy show. Something funny happened, and I laughed before I even had time to think about why. Mia turned to me, smiling. "You got that joke." I nodded. Yeah, it was funny. And it was not because I had translated it in my head, but because I actually understood it. The biggest change was in my conversations. Before, I was always careful with my words. I would stop, think, translate, and then speak. But now, I was speaking without stopping so much. One night, Mia and I were cooking dinner together. She was telling me a story about her childhood, and I was laughing. At one point, I jumped in and said, "That's remind me of something funny that happened in my school." Mia smiled, but then she said, "Oh, you mean, that reminds me." I blinked. I had made a grammar mistake. A few months ago, I would have felt embarrassed, but now I just nodded and repeated it. "Oh, that reminds me." "Got it." Mia gave me a thumbs up. "You're getting so good at this, Renee." And the crazy thing was, I knew she was right. The biggest shock came one night when I had a dream. In the dream, I was walking through the streets of New York. I stopped at a cafe and ordered a coffee. The barista asked me something and I answered. We talked for a while, laughing and chatting like old friends. Then suddenly I woke up. I sat up in bed trying to remember the dream. What was strange about it? Why did it feel different? Then it hit me. The whole dream had been in English. Not Italian, not a mix of both. Just English. I sat there for a long time, thinking about it. I wasn't just learning English anymore. My brain was accepting it as part of my life. And that was when I truly knew I wasn't translating in my head anymore. I was living in English. After that, I stopped thinking of English as something foreign. It wasn't just a subject I studied, it was part of me now. I didn't worry about sounding perfect. I didn't panic if I forgot a word. I didn't translate everything before I spoke. One day I was sitting in a park reading my book when I got a phone call. It was my mom. I answered in Italian, excited to tell her about my day. But as I spoke, I realized something. I was struggling to find the right Italian words. I laughed. English had become so natural to me that now I had to think before speaking my own language. My mom laughed too. "Renee, you're becoming a real New Yorker." And maybe she was right, because in that moment, sitting in a park, speaking English every day, thinking in English, dreaming in English. I felt at home. The day I realized that English had become part of my life, everything changed. I was no longer afraid to speak. I didn't second-guess myself every time I opened my mouth. I didn't freeze when someone spoke too fast. But most importantly, I felt like myself in English. Before, English was something I was trying to learn. Now it was something I lived. One morning, I walked into my favorite cafe. The same cafe where months ago I had felt nervous just saying, "One coffee, please." Now I stepped up to the counter with a smile. "Hey, good morning. Can I get a medium latte with oat milk?" The barista nodded. "Of course, that'll be $5.50. I handed him the money, took my coffee, and walked to my seat. It was such a simple interaction, just a few words. But as I sat down, I realized something. I hadn't planned my sentence in my head. I hadn't translated. I hadn't worried about whether my grammar was perfect. I had just spoken. It was normal. It was natural. And it felt amazing. The next time I really noticed my progress was in my English class. Before, I always sat quietly. I listened carefully, took notes, and only spoke when I absolutely had to. I was afraid of making mistakes, afraid that people would judge me. But one day, my teacher asked a question. "What's something interesting you've learned since moving to New York?" Without even thinking, I raised my hand. Me, Renee, the quiet one. The girl who used to be terrified of speaking. The teacher smiled. "Yes, Renee?" I took a breath and started talking. "I learned that speaking English is not just about words, it's about confidence. At first, I was scared to make mistakes, but now I realize that making mistakes is part of learning. Every time I speak, I improve." The teacher nodded. "That's a great point. Language is about communication, not perfection." I smiled, and when I looked around, I saw my classmates smiling too. For the first time, I felt like I belonged. One day after class, a girl named Sophia came up to me. "Renee, how do you speak so confidently?" she asked. "I still get nervous." I laughed. "Oh, Sophia, I used to be just like you. I was scared all the time." She looked surprised. "Really? But you speak so well now." I thought about my journey, the fear, the struggle, the moments when I felt lost, and I smiled. You know what helped me? I stopped trying to be perfect. I just spoke, even when I made mistakes, even when I was embarrassed. Little by little, it got easier. Sophia nodded slowly. "So, I should just talk more." "Yes," I said. "Talk, listen, repeat, keep going. One day you'll wake up and realize that you're thinking in English without even trying." She smiled. "Thanks, Renee. That really helps." And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just learning English anymore. I was helping others learn too. As the months passed, my life in New York felt more natural than ever. I could joke with my friends in English. I could chat with strangers without fear. I could enjoy TV shows without subtitles, order food without hesitation, and share my thoughts without overthinking. One night, Mia and I went to a small party at a friend's apartment. The room was full of people, Americans, international students, all talking, laughing, sharing stories. At first, I just listened, but soon I found myself joining in. A guy named Jake was telling a funny story about his dog stealing his pizza. Without thinking, I laughed and said, "Oh, that reminds me of my dog back home. One time he stole a whole cake from the table." Jake laughed. "No way." "What kind of cake?" "Chocolate," I said. "My mom was so mad." The conversation continued, flowing easily. No fear, no hesitation. Just me living my life in English. One evening, I was walking home from class, looking at the lights of the city. The same streets that had once felt huge and scary now felt familiar and welcoming. I thought about the girl I had been when I first arrived in New York. The girl who felt lost, who struggled with English, who was too afraid to speak. And then I thought about who I was now. A girl who spoke English confidently. A girl who made friends, laughed, and shared her thoughts. A girl who wasn't afraid anymore. I smiled to myself. I had done it. I had embraced my new life. I had found my voice, and I knew from that moment on I would never lose it again. Renee's journey shows that learning English is not just about studying grammar or memorizing vocabulary. It's about living the language, embracing mistakes, and building confidence. If you're on the same journey, keep going. Speak every day, push through the fear. One day, just like Renee, you'll wake up and realize English is part of you now. And that will be the moment you truly succeed.